Hello again, and thank you for joining me for another episode of the Noble Father podcast. Today is January the 26th of 2026, and there's never going to be a day like this again. And so we really need to be intentional about the time and about our roles as fathers. You know, if you're listening for a first time, you're gonna hear a wide range of things that I touch upon. And, you know, one of the things I'm trying to do for 2026 is to kind of depart myself from the political side of things and, you know, talk more about more practical, applicable things as it relates to fathers. You know, some reasoning for myself, you know, in that journey of talking, you know, these are mainly monologues and I'm really talking around a topic, but like in my mind, everything is connected, right? We are a part of this world, and in it, there's going to be so many different interlayers of roots and fibers that and just like where it touches on things. And so I feel like it's not something that can be divorced from politics or from you know, current events and things in this world. You know, even in today's episode, I'm going to be talking about anxiety and, you know, ADHD and raising children who are mentally strong, who can think for themselves. Because, well, you know, how is that relevant to politics? Well, you know, this story of Andrew Pretty, who was shot, you know, in Minneapolis. And even with the Renee Good situation, right, getting shot, you know, I really think that there's something to be said about presence of mind, right? And you know, if you listen to last episode, you know, from last week, you know, we talked about the dual process of our minds, in the sense that you know, there's a battle between an emotional side and a logical side, and if you were to look at both of those situations and contexts, I would say that the emotional side got the better of them. And it cost them their lives, you know, as opposed to, you know, where we should come from a logical side, where we slow down, not get impulsive in the way that we think, and you know, put ourselves into a situation that's, you know, not good. And you know, when I'm looking at those situations, I wonder in my head, you know, where did it all go wrong? And I think that there's a lot to be said about, you know, historical context, right? If we look back, even, you know, I mean, you can go back 400 years, 300 years, or, you know, whatever, 100 years, you know, you won't see, for example, I don't think you'd see the level of obesity that we see in today's modern age. You wouldn't see the level of ADHD in today's modern age. You wouldn't see the level of anxiety in today's modern age, you know, in children, in young people, right? And the mental health, even the deterioration of mental health, social, you know, pressures for families. There's so many things. I feel like, you know, when you look back on it, you're like, wow, we didn't have those problems back then. You know, what was the cause and the reasoning behind it? Well, you didn't have prevalence of fast food and poor health and all these things, and there was reasons behind it. You know, in this episode, I'm talking about anxiety and ADHD. I'm only going to go back to like the 80s, right, where I came from. I could go even further behind that. Not that I was around then, but just there's was it success leaves clues, right? You know, we can go back and look at all the things that led us to where we are today and how we got to this place today. You know, even it's just the topic of anxiety and ADHD, like there's a lot that you can draw from that, right? You know, if you're born in the 80s, you know, just ask yourself, you know, about your childhood, look back on the things of your life, right? I mean, you can easily say that I was, you know, in my 90s, and when I started to understand, you know, more of myself, and I had a memory of the things that happened, right? You know, if you don't know, from the age of 1 to 3, I was in Vancouver, and then from 3 to 10, I was in Venezuela, and so, you know, there's this chunk of I'm all over the place, and so, you know, understand that the cultural context and the things that I grew up in were all very, very different. And so, you know, from 10 till I am where I am now, you know, I was in Vancouver largely. There was a span from 22 to 28 that I was in China. But like, you know, I really want you to think about childhood, right? When I look at situations like the Renee Good or the Andrew Petty situation, I think about my kids and how I'm raising them, right? Like because when we look at at a person's life, who do we go to find accountability for where this person ended up? I know that they're adults and they have their own decisions to make, but that started from a foundation, and that foundation started from when they were a child. And what does the Bible say about that, right? Direct a child in the way he should go, and in the future he will not depart from it. As parents, we are called to set that stage. We are called to raise our children in that direction, right? Now you can include things, right? And we're talking about historical context. Include things like divorce, right? Ugly custody battles, right? You can throw in technology and things in there. Not watching our kids, not allowing our kids to fail on the smaller things, and so they have to, and so they learn in the world where failure could lead to the loss of life. That is literally what we're seeing, and so it's on us as parents, right? Either you are intentional about how you raise your kids in the little things, and lead them in the way that they should go now, or else you're gonna fail them in the future. And that blows my mind, because when I see kids who are spoiled, and their parents always bail them out, I feel like that's a form of child abuse, because you are setting this child up to fail, and to think that because you're just not going to be there the rest of their lives. Like, there's going to come a point where you will depart them, and they will have to make decisions on their own. If you create a dependence on you, you can very easily, you're setting your child up for failure. And I play this out in my own life as well, because my mother was very overbearing, and this came with a culture that she came from, right? Cantonese culture is one in which it's never enough, right? You're not doing good enough, and it's a very subjective thing, and you've heard me talk about it ad nauseum, with the dishwashing drying rack, right? When you put the dishes, I was always trying to earn my mother's approval in putting the dishes, right? And as obviously it's a very subjective thing. You can move a bowl, an inch to the left, and and say that it's better that way. I was always disappointed. My mom would always come down, and I would always think that I'd be able to do it this time and impress her that I did the right thing. And she would always sigh, and never was able to give the positive reinforcement first before suggesting her placement of the dishes. And I was always left wanting, right? And even now, as an entrepreneur, as a business owner, man, in everything I do, really, is you have this prevailing voice in the back of your head, the critic that tells you you're not good enough, you're not doing good enough, it's not perfect enough. And when you're thinking like that, you lead to a place of inactivity, in inability to move forward, and this place of perfectionism, and it causes you to not take action. It's a very it's a beast that I have to conquer every single day, in everything that I do, right? And as soon as I feel that coming on, I get up in arms about it. So, what are we seeing today, right? Childhood anxiety is no longer the exception. It's pretty much the norm. When I talk about anxiety and in some loose connection, right? ADHD, teachers report more emotional breakdowns, right? They report more ADHD. I feel like I hear that from everybody, that that kid is, being diagnosed with ADHD. Counselors report longer wait lists. Parents feel like they're walking on eggshells. Kids feel overwhelmed, by normal life challenges. It's a prevailing issue. On the topic of ADHD, my son in grade 2, a lot of teachers were saying, I think your son has ADHD. He's not able to sit still. He's all over the place. And, and we were very careful to not allow this as a identity moniker on our son, that he would adopt it. We were careful not to say these things around him, because, words have power. And when you diagnose a person with it, it can be very fatal. And so, my wife and I made a lot of adjustments to the way that we raised our kids, from nutrition to rest to screen time to how we play, routines in terms of sleep. And man, it was amazing, because when we implemented all of those things and we were more intentional in that situation, we were directing our child in the way he should go. Man, he went from not being able to sit still, to always being, fidgety, antsy, right, hyperactive, to being able to sit still and read a book. and also focusing in school, and teachers reporting like major drastic changes in his demeanor in class. And it takes some regulation for us to teach him how to regulate as well, and to remind him, hey, like, sit still, right? We're eating dinner. And it was very, the power of intention is so important as a parent. So think back, right? When you were if you're a parent listening to this, and you were born in the 80s or the 90s, right? Broadly speaking, most kids experience like free range outdoor play, right? And if you think about the playgrounds back in the day, man, they weren't nice places. Like, there was no foamy, cushiony floor for you to land on. Like the person who planned the playground didn't organize safety as kind of this thing. They did, but it wasn't the thing, right? Like, man, I remember there were like, those fireman poles that you come down, man, they were like super high in the air. Now you look at it, they're like, not as high, obviously. Right? There's other things, like most kids experience conflict resolution without parents, like adult intervention. And I see that periodically here in today's age, where parents don't say anything and let the kids deal with it in conflict resolution. And it's cool to see the whole thing play out, right? Last thing you want is for your kid to run over and say, the kid hit me, and then you step in as a parent and then you go have a conversation with the kids. There is a certain point where you got to speak up and say something as well. With boredom, right? Learning how to cope with it. Like, there's a lot of I see everywhere I go, man. It's like, even with my kids, like, I'll use my own kids as an example, right? They're bored. They don't want to, they don't want to engage. They don't know how to self-soothe. They don't know how to go find something to do. And I think about when you're in your 80s, right? When you were bored, man, when you give me a rubber band and a piece of paper, and I can shoot like, those hard, I could fold the paper and shoot it like bullets, right? And entertain myself, right? Risk, right? Understanding risk from kids in the 80s, climbing trees, biking far from home, right? Coming home late at night. I was involved in all these other things, blowing things up during Halloween. Like, those are all parts of the journey of being a kid. Real consequences for behavior. Like, man, you better believe, man, my parents were really good at this. Do you need to go to the bathroom? Is what they'd ask me in public. They'd say, do you want to go to the bathroom? And that was the sign for, you're going to get in trouble real bad. And it's funny, because growing up, my parents would be like, just wait till we get home, right? Because they're not going to discipline me in front of other people. They're like, wait till we get home. And man, I'd always act like, as soon as that was said, I'd be in my best behavior. And then I'd hope that whenever I get home and I could be like, nice or whatever, and I could get away with it. But man, they always showed through. They always came through with the stick, ready to smack my ass. And I was a kid that definitely deserved it. I look back on that and I think, thank the Lord that my parents disciplined me and gave me real consequences, because I was a real knucklehead growing up. And, boys growing up it's kind of like that. Limited adult surveillance, right? Man, running around the church, breaking pencils with my head, and, getting in trouble. And, at one point I beat up a kid in Sunday school. Like, I faced the consequences, right? You face the consequences for your actions. Like, you didn't get away with it. You tried your best to get away with it, but you don't, right? And this created kind of this high tolerance for discomfort, right? Stronger problem solving skills. You get greater independence. You have less dependency on adult emotional regulation. And you learn internally that, you can figure this out and you can survive even the hardest of things. And, if we contrast that with today's kids, man, like, kids today, childhood, right? Constant adult supervision, right? There's helicoptering that goes on, right? You don't want to have your kids get hurt. Like, as soon as they fall, you're like, you dote on them. Like, you poor thing. Like, get up. Like, all this stuff. Like, man, if you step back and let the kid figure it out themselves, right? And it's interesting. You see that in babies. I don't know if you've ever seen the reel where parents are holding the baby and then the parent pretends to smack their head, like pretends the kid hit their head, and then you go to say, you poor thing. The baby will start to cry even though they didn't hit their head, right? It's this they see the emotional response that they're getting, and they're gonna dive into that. They're gonna dote on that. Parents intervening too quickly, right, in conflict. That's something you see in today's age, right? Structured, scheduled lives, less unstructured play, right? So there's always there's guidelines that we try to fit them into this box, and you have to play this way. Fear-driven parenting, right? It's not safe out there. We say kids can't ride on the. I mean, you can say that it's true, right? I mean, we are in a different age, and it does suck that we can't, do that in certain neighborhoods now, right? Other things like emotional, over attunement, right? Parents who manage their feelings constantly, right? You're helicopter parenting, right? You're just literally over them, and you're telling them how they feel. You're telling how them not to feel, and what they cannot say, what they can and cannot do. And it makes it so that there's a lower frustration tolerance, right? They have fear of mistakes, right? They have avoidance of discomfort. They have, external dependency for emotional regulation. There's no need for them to figure it out. They're just going to they're going to rely on somebody else, right? And then in turn, these kids learn that someone will rescue me, right? Discomfort means danger, so I got to stay away, don't do it, right? And then I need help to function. Like, this is just, and then you inject things like technology. Well, it's no wonder they depend on that. And parents just, when you go to the restaurant, man, we see these families that have these kids that are on the iPad eating chicken fingers, and there's no conversation, and the habits are there, and you can see what would happen if you play it out over multiple years. Man, how many times have I seen in dad's groups where dad will say, well, how do I have a conversation with my teens around the dinner table? Man, you think that you're going to start when they're teens? Like, you missed that opportunity, like when they were children, right? When they were young and malleable, right? You missed it. You allowed the phone to be there. You allowed for other things to be injected in there. Maybe you just take the dinner and you go sit around the TV, and you guys stay entertained around there, and that was your family time. It's too late. One of the dads in my community, his name's Dan, and, his kid is 4 years old. He was telling me a story about how, they were sitting around, his mom and dad were visiting, right? Grandma and grandpa were visiting, and they were sitting around the table, and this 4-year-old pipes up and says, hey, what are you guys most grateful for today? Or what was a lesson you learned today? I forgot what was the question, but like, that just speaks to what kind of father and how intentional and present Dan is in his family. For a 4-year-old, the youngest kid in the family, when grandma and grandpa are over, to lead this question of discussion for everybody to talk around. And it was amazing to hear, right? Like, it doesn't matter what the response is. The fact that this little child at 4 years of age was wanting intentional conversation. You can come to the conclusion that Dan doesn't have his device on the counter, on the table. Nobody's having that. They are having intentional conversations. They're asking very pointed questions of what happened during the day, and you're having kids go over the things that's going on. You could ask simple questions of, what are you most grateful for, man, and just let kids like diagnose the day. Like, and this is something that I'm learning to do myself. When I ask my kids now, right? My kids are 10 and 7. How was school? First response, good. That's it, right? Most parents, and sometimes me, I also let them get away with it, and I say, oh, cool, and then that's it. Like, we need to dig more, right? We need to make it a priority to get more out of them, right? Because then that helps them to really think about their day and diagnose the things that happen, and oh yeah, I got in a fight with this person, or I had an argument with this person put me down, and okay, so what did you do about it, right? Like, we should be digging and having more intentional conversation. And so this is important for us to like help them, teach them how to function. My wife, really taught me a lesson on this, is like, stuff with like the dishwashing rack. And that's a good example, is like, we want our kids at a young age to fail at that, because when they go out into the world, they're going to fail at things that they can't even fail even once. Right. So if we can't even teach them with the simple things, there's going to be more complex things in the world that they cannot deal with. And from which that little lesson can impact that, right? And so when I think about the stuff that's happening in Minneapolis, and all these people, like fighting against, law, pushing against authority, I can only think of like, man, if this kid and this adult was regulated, and what's interesting in the Andrew Preddy situation is that the parents actually warned their son to not get involved in that. And yet, in the moment of emotional turmoil, when these women there who were impeding the agents, blocking them and not obeying and not complying, for Andrew to step in between, like, you've put yourself in harm's way unnecessarily, to great detriment to your own life. I just think that, as parents, we have that responsibility to teach them how to think. And if you understand the dual process of your thinking, if you understand anxiety and how the brain works, and from a young age teaching your kids to regulate, it'll help them, right? And so, technology, I want to talk about that before, we go any further, is that, technology is very much a perfect storm, right? Phones, tablets, and games and endless content, right? The scrolling, it provides the brain with so much abundance of dopamine, right? It's constant stimulation, instant gratification. It's low effort, and it gives you high rewards, man. Like you can't make anything better than that, right? Like you're not having to put in anything to get a high volume of dopamine. And the brain adapts to that, right? The brain is changed. The chemistry is changed, right? It reduces your attention span. It increases irritability, and it makes like real life feel boring and overwhelming. Like you watch the movie Avatar, and you're like, man, I kind of wish I was in that, right? When talking about increased irritability, I say this a lot. When I see my kids get off of, extended periods of being on the screen, they are very irritable, and they're literally at each other's throats as soon as the screens are off. They almost forget how to be human beings, right? Because imagine that, right? You're getting dopamine right away, and I can get it super quick. And whenever you're dealing with another imperfect person, this person's not going to do what you want to do. So anything you do with this person right away, it's like you have to have a reset. You have to reorganize your mind to like really be present and intentional with this person, right? And so you'll see kids that are raised on screens, right? They struggle with emotional regulation. They struggle with patience. They struggle with focus, and they have delayed gratification. As we're talking about this, right? It's so interesting because there's a dad in my community who's a teacher in high school in New York, and like out of 150 students, he said the other day, I think there was like only 30 students were going to pass, and like not even like they were going to do so with flying colors. Like the disparity between kids who actually get it and are actually working hard on their work, and you can imagine if the kids are like this, you can imagine what their parents are like and what their living situation is like, right? You're talking about a fifth of the class of passing this test. And, you can hear the hopelessness in his voice, because when he tells the story, he rants about it, because what do you expect him to do? The principals are giving him trouble. Like, why are you failing so many students? Well, they're not doing the thing, so why should I pass them on? The fact that they got to his grade and they didn't know even the simplest things of how to read or whatever it is, like that should tell you the state of our world as it comes to parenting and child development. Right? And then you inject things like social media, man. In the 80s, you didn't have any of those things, right? And even in the 90s, we really didn't have those things. And so, like, just think about all those things that develop. I want to make sure that I move forward here, because it is important, right? So what do we do, right? From diagnosis to hope, like how do we move forward in raising, mentally strong children, like kids, right? With an understanding that we as parents need to be mentally strong. Don't just do it as you say, like do as I do. Look at my life as an example. If you're telling your kids and your life does not reflect this, be very careful, right? Your kids will see it. They are smarter than you think, and they will call you out on your BS, right? So mentally strong parenting means allowing kids to struggle safely, right? Teaching emotional regulation, not emotional avoidance, right? Like difficult topics, we stay away from that. We don't talk about that, right? We make them walk on eggshells on things, right? I'm not going to go there. I don't want to go there. I can go to the politics again, right? Like if you don't teach emotional regulation on even topics of politics, then you teach them emotional avoidance. And whenever you avoid these things, then you're susceptible to what other people believe, and you don't make your own judgment call for things. The emotions is what's going to drive you. You should limit tech intentionally, right? My kids, when they're schooled the next day, they don't get screen time. So Friday, when they get home from school, they have screen time. Saturday, they get home from school. Not from school. Saturday, they have screen time, a limited amount. Sunday comes around. Monday, there's school, so they don't have screen time on that day. Very intentional about the time that they spend. Yeah, anywhere from 2 to 3 hours. And even that is a lot, right? Think about that. Back in the day, never had that. Encouraging responsibility early, right? Chores is important, right? Teaching them that they need to do the dishes, they need to clean up their room, they need to, clear their backpack as soon as they're home, like, and being on top of them whenever they do that. My son does his own laundry. He's 10. He's been doing that since he was 8. My daughter is getting to that place. Whenever the laundry's done, they get up here and they do their own laundry. They put away their clothes, they fold it and take care of it. Modeling calm leadership, right, in yourself, right? If you're not even regulated and you fly off the handle on your kids, guess what? Your kid's going to do that out there in the world, right? And those protesters in Minnesota, man, we're seeing that, right? Like, dude, calm leadership, right? There's ways to go about disagreeing and protesting something. Don't do it in such aggressive ways. And this can be played out even in discussions, right? In debates and conversations that we jump straight to insulting people, man. Like, that's not emotional regulation whatsoever, right? Prioritizing connection over performance, teaching kids that you are capable, right? Like, and this is what I'm doing in my life, right? I don't want to repeat the mistakes that my mom made, the trauma that it inflicted on me. Whenever I see my kids do something good, or doing something that they should be doing, I'm quick to say a word of affirmation to commend them for a job well done, and then go to give them feedback, make them feel like they did the right thing, and then go to talk about, hey, what can we improve about this for later, for another time. And so this makes it so that they're choosing long-term resilience over short-term comfort for as parents, right? We want to make sure that, like, we are not there to be their best friends. We are there to raise healthy, mentally strong, mentally competent, civilized human beings, not ones that can be easily swayed by the ways of the world, swayed by their friends. They need to think, right? My friend Dan, again, I'm going to bring up again, he talked about this guy who was at a retreat that they were at, father, son, and his dad, actually 3 generations together at this like father son experience. And there was a guy who was there that was doing a talk. He was hanging out with this guy, and the parents were saying you shouldn't be hanging out with this person, and they weren't listening to him. And one of the days that guy his friend was saying, should go, I want to go and break into this person's house. And he tagged along. And they broke into the house, didn't realize that the homeowner was there. This guy that he was involved with ended up shooting and killing this gentleman. And because it was in Florida, they charged, this kid, who was with them, with murder. As well. And so, together, they were there together, even though he didn't do it, even though he didn't pull the trigger, even though he was just there, got put in jail for, I think he said 15 years or something like that, right? Major chunk of your life is taken out, right? All from what? Not listening to your parents, right? Being in the wrong place at the wrong time. If you had the presence of mind to realize that, hey, this is a bad idea and I should stay away from this, right? Even though you think that you could get away with it, like, a child who can regulate emotion and understand the implications of their own actions would not put themselves in that situation, which is the same thing that could be said about the 2 names that I mentioned prior, right? You're carrying a gun, you're at a protest, you're standing in the middle of the road, and then you go to defend these women who are not complying with the officers, and they were impeding the operation. You've injected yourself in that situation. However, if you're going to step into that and risk your life, then if you step into that, then you're going to risk your life. I guess that's the only way to say that, right? And so would an emotionally regulated person step into a situation like that, knowing full well all the things that are, all the extenuating situations, right? If I had a gun in my back, in my holster, and this was going on, and like sensing how dangerous that situation could be, I'd hope your regulated response would be like, whoa, I need to really be careful what I do here, right? Because that's an emotionally tense situation. These guys don't even know you have a gun. And as soon as they find out you have a gun, boom, it's too late, right? You can freeze all the frames you want, but ultimately, if he wasn't there, or maybe just at the sidewalk at a distance, right, whenever they're not complying, and instead of stepping in to remain calm and stay back, right, like, I don't think anybody would have been shot in that situation, right? Like, that's safe to say. And so, I want to close with this, right? We didn't create anxious kids because we love them too much, right? We created anxious kids because we're afraid for them, right? And you look at the world and think, man, it's a terrible place for them to grow up in. And then so what do? You shelter them, right? And you keep them in, and then you make them, you tell them how to think and how to feel and what they should do and how they should do it. And man, they don't get to develop that for themselves. And so whenever they go into the world, man, you're just creating dependent people, right? So the solution isn't less love, right? The solution is stronger leadership as parents, as adults, right? Speaking up, and also like leaning into personal development and finding people around you to call you out on your BS, right? Kids don't need parents who remove every obstacle. They need parents who believe they're strong enough to climb over them, right? Trust the wings that your kids have been given. Teach them not to depend on the branches that they stand upon, because when the branch breaks, you have your wings. A bird doesn't depend on the branch, it depends on the wings. And we need to teach them to fly, right? If you watch a bird, right? A bird teaching its chicks how to fly, they just let them jump off the thing and try to figure it out, like do it. And if they hit the ground, they hit the ground. Like there's a component in which we have to let go, right? The analogy of, you just gotta, like, you're holding on to your kid's hand and one day you have to let go. You have to let them figure it out for themselves. And that's our role as responsible adults and parents, is to like get them ready for that road for whenever they're ready to go. Last thing you want is a 40-year-old virgin in your basement, right? That does nothing. And, we're seeing that today now too, right? We shelter them so much that we just don't want to see them get out of the house and figure it out, but they need that for their well-being. I want to make sure that I leave it at that. I can go all day about stuff like that. And so, really think about the regulation of your household, right? How are you raising your kids? Man, I'd encourage you, if you don't know what I'm talking about, man, take a week and really pull yourself out of your shoe and just watch your children. What are you seeing in them, right? Do you think, are they regulated, right? Are they playing and interacting with their world well? Are they able to sit still and focus when they need to, right? Are they having intentional conversations? How much of your kids' time is spent buried on a screen, right? Are they sleeping well? Are they eating well, right? Are they mentally strong? Are they thinking about good thoughts, right? Who are they involved with, right? And you can ask these things about your own life, because what you do as a family man, as a parent, as an adult, impacts your children as well. If you're prone to eating unhealthy, your kids are eating the same food. If you're prone to negative thoughts and blowing off steam and just regulating yourself, right, whenever your kids are not listening to you, what kind of model of behavior are you modeling for your children? It's not good, right? It's all related, it's all relevant, and it has an impact. And so I'm going to leave it at that. Thank you for joining me. If you see, I'm wearing a Noble Father merch right now as I'm doing this podcast. If you're interested in getting merch and supporting my channel, hey, please go check it out. It's store.noble-father.com, and you can be able to get merch for yourself, hats. I have phone cases. Look, I got a phone case. Oh, I just got this too. See, phone case, right? Other merch, hats, kind of things, and it goes to support me. And also, if you're a father listening to this and you want to be in a community where you have your BS called out, right, and need safe space held, an honest space where you can talk about things like marriage or divorce or separation or custody or business or your own personal mental health, like everything related to being a dad, like we are here for it. We have multiple weekly meetups. We have a Bible study on Wednesdays. We have a very intentional space on Thursdays where we talk about everything. We bring a prompt and guys talk, and we're doing personal development as well together. You want to get in and join us if you are serious about being a better father. We are there for that. And so thank you for joining me. Please share this with people that could benefit from the message. And yeah, just remember, right? Like I said, we're not promised tomorrow. So be present and stay noble. Until next time, thank you for joining me, and have a great week. Bye for now.